Hello. All right, we're good.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good evening. Welcome to the Marcellus Central School District Board of Education Annual Budget Public Hearing for this evening, Monday, May 13th, 2024. At this time, I'd like to ask everyone to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Each year before the budget vote, the Board of Education is required to conduct an annual public hearing regarding the school district budget. In a moment, I will be turning the meeting over to the permanent chairperson, Mayor Chad Clark, who will conduct the annual budget hearing and election. With this time, resolved that the Board of Education approves the appointment of Mayor Chad Clark as permanent chairperson for the 2024 annual budget hearing and vote. May I have a motion? Motion. Catherine? Second. Second, Kelly. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Mayor Clark, the meeting is now yours.
Thank you. First, I want to ask for the record that the meeting minutes from last year's budget hearing on May 8th, 2023 be read by Colleen O'Leary, the district clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Referring to the minutes of last year's meeting, after the welcome and pledge of allegiance, Mayor John Curtin was appointed as the permanent chairperson who was to conduct the annual budget hearing and election. There was a motion made by Christine Shea and seconded by Kelly Rossiter that the board appoint Mayor Curtin as the permanent chairperson. The minutes of the previous year's meeting of May 9th, 2022 were read. Mayor Curtin reviewed the rules of conduct for the meeting. Introduction of the board administrators and board candidates were made by Mayor Curtin. Superintendent Michelle Brentner and Business Administrator Anthony Sinaccio reviewed the budget details and propositions. The floor was open to the community for questions. There were multiple questions from the public, all of which were answered by Mrs. Brentner and Mr. Sinaccio. The meeting was then adjourned by Mayor Curtin at 8:01 p.m. Thank you.
As in the past, I want to review the rules of conduct that we follow during the annual meeting. They are: all remarks should be directed to the chair, who shall decide all questions of order. I remind everyone to be courteous in language and deportment. Please avoid all personalities and do not allude to others by name or to motives. During the questioning period, which the superintendent will moderate later in the program, we ask anyone who wishes to ask a question to state his or her name so that the district clerk will be able to take accurate minutes. Let me start with some introductions of the school board, school administrators, and board candidates. The current members of the school board include Christine Shea, President, Sean Eddy, Vice President, Catherine Branson Dennis, Josh Matusik, Michael McCullough, Eric McQuadic, and Kelly Rossiter. Our school administrators include Jean Charlo, the superintendent, Tony Sinaccio, the school business official, Carol Lux, the director of special education, Michael Freed, the director of athletics, Eric Hubbard, the director of technology, Ryan Riegler, the director of facilities, Amy Mitchell, the director of food service, Susan Stern, director of transportation, and principals Robert Montgomery, Boyan Mahanchik, Stephanie Rice, and Brian Seeley. Before introducing the candidates for school board, I would note that this is not any time for the candidates or their supporters to campaign for their school board position. There are 2 seats and 4 candidates. The candidates for school board are Justin Pritchard, Katie Cook, Amy Bartolotta, Elizabeth Swenson. The budget details and propositions will now be reviewed by Jean Charlo, superintendent, and Anthony Sinaccio, school business official. Mrs. Charlo and Mr. Sinaccio will moderate the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So welcome, everyone. We are glad that you are here to learn about our 24-25 school budget. Last week, taxpayers should have received in the mail the school budget newsletter. And so that information is also on our website, just so that you know where to find it. Let me, exit here for a second. If you look on our website and go, to the tab About and click on Budget Information. And right on the left-hand side, here is all the information for the 24-25 budget, including the budget brochure that was mailed home last week. And so tonight, as Mayor Clark mentioned, Mr. Snaccio, our school business official, and I will be providing an overview of the 24-25 school year budget and our process in the development of the budget. We encourage you to ask questions, and if you're like me and think of a question after you've left tonight, we'll be sure to have our contact information on the last slide so that you can send us an email or make a call to ask that question. So before we launch into the specifics about the budget, I do want to just display this slide for a minute. This collage of students in action is why we do what we do. And we are committed to offering excellence in student experience and programming. And as Tony will cover a little bit later, our funds are allocated accordingly, all for program. There we go. So these are some terms that you're going to hear tonight, and Tony and I will do our best to define them as we go. In addition to defining them for you, we will provide some context about the terms in relation to the budget. And so here are some fast facts about our budget. But before I begin to cover these, what I do want to just sort of say is the term budget, I think sometimes we forget that it is really an estimate. It's an estimate of what we're anticipating our expenses are going to be, and it's an anticipation and an estimate of what our expenses will be. So just like your household budgets, there can be fluctuations, you know, from month to month, depending on different factors. And so if you think about a school district and a school district budget, some of those fluctuations can be the price of gas, electricity, maybe an equipment failure. And so like a household budget, sometimes those expenses can be unexpected, and as well, it can be exponential for a district. So just to review the fast facts. So starting out, our total budget for 24-25 is $41,709,230. And so that includes a reliance on appropriated fund balance. And that was one of the terms that you just saw. An appropriated fund balance is a pool of dollars that is actually set aside for unanticipated expenses. And so much like I referred to as when you have a household income and you have an unexpected expense, the appropriated fund balance sort of helps mitigate that fluctuation that school districts experience. And so the next bullet point is 3.60% tax levy increase. And so what we're asking our taxpayers in Marcellus is a levy of $22,275,677. And so that is actually meets the tax cap. And I want to just again, that was a term that you saw in the very initial slide. I want to just sit and talk a little bit about the 2% cap, because I think there is a misconception. And so what that 2% cap means, there is and Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, a 9-step, 13-step formula that districts use that really provides to the district the maximum allowable amount that the district can levy. Again, with that simple majority. And so it is either in that formula, the 2% or CPI. So it's just a factor that goes into the formula along with many other factors. So, as you probably know, CPI, Consumer Price Index, is right now at about 4%, somewhere in that range. And so you either put in CPI or 2%, whichever is less into that formula. And so obviously that's where that terminology 2% cap comes from. And then on the ballot, you'll see 3 propositions, and that is the school budget. Also a purchase of bus purchases. So we have a set schedule for purchasing buses. And so what that does is, as you know, like your own vehicles, over time, they break down, they become more expensive to fix. And so we have a replacement schedule, and this proposed bus purchase is in line with that plan schedule. And then the final levy or the proposition will be the library levy. So school districts that have a library in their boundaries are required to help the library levy a tax to support that library. And so that is the 3rd proposition that you will see on the ballot. Yes.
A question. So Tony, the 1.8 million fund balance, almost $2 million. That is, correct me if I'm wrong, that is going to help offset the 41 million 709. And where did that fund balance come from?
Sure. That's a good question. So those dollars accumulate over a period of several years. So when we talk about a school district holding reserves and fund balance, all of those dollars are generated from residual dollars from prior years. So
They aren't spent?
that are not spent, correct? And so currently our total fund balance and reserves was about $9 million. And so, and just an interesting fact to contemplate is if we were to go back prior to COVID, that number was about 6 million. So we've accumulated about an additional $3 million worth of reserves and fund balance. And that has entirely to do with how we elected to use our stimulus dollars from COVID. And so those stimulus dollars, because they're accounted for in a separate fund, let's just, for the sake of this discussion, say that those dollars equal about $3 million. That was $3 million we weren't spending in our general fund. And so that's why we've managed to accumulate an additional 3 million. If you remember, I'm talking about a lot of things here, not just appropriated fund balance. If you remember, if we go back to 2 years ago, we put forth a proposition to fund a capital reserve for up to $3.3 million. It's no coincidence that that was the number. So those residual dollars that we accumulated with our federal stimulus money for COVID, we're indirectly using those dollars to construct the ag facility and accomplish a few other projects throughout the district. So let's go back to pre-COVID, that's $6 million. Of the $6 million at that time, about $1.5 million was allocated for this purpose, for appropriated fund balance. And so as Jean said earlier, and this is precisely what these dollars represent, are funds set aside in the form of revenues that can be used to pay for unforeseen expenses. And this happens periodically. We had one year where we had an influx of students requiring additional services of BOCES. And over a 2-year period, with those students that moved in, it was about an additional $1 million in expenses that were unforeseen. So it was great that we had those dollars available to pay for those expenses. If we didn't do that, theoretically, we'd have to come to the board and figure out a way to get additional funds, which could mean another vote. So all school districts apply this practice in some way, shape, or form to be sure that we have funds to pay for unforeseen expenses.
Would it be incorrect to make an analogy to a savings account?
It would be, I would say, make an analogy to, as Gene said earlier, if you're, you know, we live in a state where we have hurricanes and your roof gets ripped off.
So rainy day,
Yeah, so it's for funds for things that you just are not expecting. That's really that simple.
does the state put guardrails on how much that can be, how much can accumulate?
No, not for appropriated fund balance. There is another portion that the state does put a cap on, and that's called unassigned or unappropriated fund balance. That's limited to 4% of the subsequent years of budget. So we currently do exceed that, but it's planned again. When we have the voters, we ask the voters to consider that proposition to move funds into a capital reserve. That's exactly why. We needed their permission to take these additional dollars and slide them into a capital reserve. So you folks will see a resolution to do that on June 3rd. We just opened bids for replacement of domestic water piping in this building. That's Chronovet. It's just all of it. So that's the final dollar amount that we need to determine how much of that 3.3 million will move into our capital reserve. So a lot of information there. You know, if I get the opportunity every year, I think that this district and the board, they do a fine job planning for these things. And today, and what we talked about today is all part of a lot of planning that was done back in 2020 for how we use our ERP funds and what our capital improvement needs would be. So
Would it be safe to assume then if we did not have that appropriated fund balance, that we would be looking at almost a $2 million cut? Making cuts of $2 million?
I couldn't answer that because that would require a lot of contemplation. I would likely suggest that we trim our budget, but that's a dangerous situation. So if we were to trim back our budget and we had no dollars built in for unforeseen expenses, we're riding a thin line. So I would probably find somewhere in the middle. But to answer your question, it's far more ideal to be in this situation than to not have those dollars for just for unforeseen expenses. Some districts will have dollars built in for unforeseen expenses that translates into a surplus at the end of the year. That's not the case for us. We ourselves, just historically, prior to me coming here from Phoenix, it was commonly known among business officials that that it's a conservative community and the budget was constructed. So, and it still is, frankly, today.
Thank you. So one of the things that I do want to cover here are just some additions and reductions that we have made for the 24-25 school budget. And really over the past 2 years, we have been planning and making a concerted effort to, like Tony just said, trim our budget. And so our revenues, so there are two main sources of revenues for us, and it is foundation aid as well as expense driven aid from the state. And then that's about 39%. And then the tax levy, which is about 53%. And so many of you have probably heard and seen in the newspaper school districts who are struggling because the state seems to be pulling back on what they're providing to districts. And so knowing that, we really have been talking as an administrative team, where can we make these cuts where it won't impact programming. And so I will just mention, we do have an addition here, that's athletic equipment, and that's $20,000. There are two things that are folded into that $20,000. One is a sound system. So we have been having some issues with one of our sound systems. And then in addition to that, we have very outdated helmets for lacrosse. And so Mr. Free's plan is to provide to our modified boys the varsity lacrosse helmets and then get new helmets for our varsity boys. And so, then under that, you'll see the reductions. So, ENL stands for English as a New Language. And over the course of the past year, we have had, students who, in addition to graduating, we have had students who are classified as English as a New Language, who have left the district. They've either moved or gone to another district. And so, what you see on the screen accounts for both salary and benefits, for that one-time position that we, have reduced. In addition to that, we've reduced one full math teacher. We've reduced a teacher on special assignment. We've reduced 0.6 phys ed teacher and reduction of 0.47 art teacher. And I honestly have to give kudos to our administrative team who have worked very hard to get the schedule for both the middle school and high school prepared long before we were ready to present the budget, because they were able to identify these areas of reduction. And so again, I do want to emphasize, we really look at these carefully because we don't want to impact programming. And so all of these were positions that we felt like did not impact that programming. I do want to say, just to point out to the community, one of the things that we are committed to, as you all know, we got UPK started 4 years ago, and the first year was 1 classroom, the second year was 2 classrooms, and now we have sort of stabilized with 3 classrooms. And we continue to be committed to offering UPK. Although it's grant funded, there still is a local share of about somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 for each classroom. But again, we're committed to that. Some of the other things that are exciting with programming that's happening at the high school. And so what we're looking at is our resources and how we can reallocate people to pick up some electives that are interesting and really sort of target the future workforce. And so we'll be offering next year an OCC course. It's called ELM 101. It is technical drawing interpretations, and it is one of the courses in the pathway for Micron credentialing. And so that will be in place next year at the high school. In addition to that, we're offering an AI course, creating content through artificial intelligence. So Mr. Seavey has done a fabulous job targeting teachers who really are looking to be innovative, and also just offering courses to students of interest. And like I said, we are focused on the future workforce. So what might be a question that you're thinking is, well, with all these reductions, why is the tax levy increasing, right? A valid question. And so this next slide will sort of highlight some of that. So contractually, and I'm going to actually ask you to focus on the gross increase at this point. Contractually, we there is an increase that we have to meet of $500,000, our gross increase. The reductions that I showed you previously, those are offsetting that gross increase. So the contractual staff increases are going to equate to about $264,815. And so again, that's an increase that we have to contractually meet. You'll see a large dollar amount when it comes to increase in employee benefit costs. So yes, Mike.
And that benefit cost includes the offset of the staff reductions as well.
It does.
Yes.
It does.
So, okay, so that would have been much higher.
Yes, if you were to tally that previous slide of, it's, I think the previous slide was around $500,000. The difference between. Good question.
Yeah.
So you have reductions there in staffing of about 460,000. Thinking 460,470. So if we go back to that next slide.
Right, but so you have the salary gross increase offset. The employee benefit is there's no offset for that. Is that built into that 503?
It is, yes. Yeah, so if we were to create that second bullet, increase employee benefits the same way that I created the one above, then yes, you would have seen a larger increase, gross increase in employee benefits offset by the reduction attributed to the staff on that previous slide. So it's a little trickier there because the top line is just salaries, really simple. Employee benefits, there are a lot of layers in there with health insurance, retirement contributions, social security. So a little trickier to go that without going into like crazy. But yes, to answer your question, I guess I would say that the employee benefit cost for the low employee spend about $700,000.
And then the third bullet there, an increase in debt service. So that was the 2021 project. That's the auditorium windows at DMS, the gym windows at DMS, the locker rooms at DMS, the roofing, and the parking lot renovation. So you'll see we had a gross increase in debt service that you can see below. It's offset by debt that is coming off. So that total amount is $606,624. And then the fourth bullet is an increase in BOCES instructional programs. And so what that means is we are, identifying students who have a desire or a need to tap into some of the amazing programming at BOCES. Any given year, this either goes down or up, and it's again sort of goes back to what I talked about budget. It's not easy to predict. And then an increase in equipment, supplies, and insurance is about $39,266.
Now, do you foresee, like with the ag building being finished, like the BOCES program possibly dropping down now that we have more of an in-house BOCES program for students?
It
Would you
could
hope-
be, Josh, it depends on the programming. The programming that we have will be an ag pathway. It depends. We will, we have welding, so it just depends on what a student may be interested in or a career path that they're going in. So we are hoping for that.
Yeah.
It's hard to exactly pinpoint. And so, one of the things that's very important is to compare yourself to other districts. And so Tony and I feel strongly about making sure that we're comparing our budget and our numbers to other districts just to see how we fare regionally and how we compare to other districts. So what you're looking at, each year, we actually categorize all the different districts around this area into category of small, medium, and large. And so what you're looking at is the amount per thousand a taxpayer pays on the assessed value of their home. So the average you can see at the top and actually at the bottom, $19.68 per $1,000 assessed value of your home. And we like to see, where do we sit, Marcellus, in this mix of districts? And so you'll see we're $17.87 per thousand assessed value. And there, as you can see here, three smaller districts that are lower. But as you can see, if you look down a little bit at 9, 10, and 11, there's some smaller districts that are also higher. And so the next point of comparison, and this is interesting for many reasons. And so this is basically the percent increase. So a comparison of 1% tax levy increase and what that looks like with districts across this region. And you can see Marcellus, if again, 1%, if that was the levy, we would be able to levy $215,000, and again, with a couple of dollars in change. But what's interesting about this is the vast difference And so you see there's district number one, that is $65,243 for 1% in the levy. But then if you look all the way down to a larger district, they, for 1%, they're levying $1 million. And so again, it makes sense, a larger district has a higher enrollment. But what I think about as a superintendent is our programming. So I want to make sure that we are competitive with some of these larger districts who are offering programming and can offer programming because they are levying so much. So we absolutely agree with the tax cap. But at the same time, we just want to be able to show the vast difference that 1% on the levy sort of garners for various different districts. Mike, I can tell you have a question. So some of these districts have commercial properties
Yeah.
too in their, Amazon and some of these big commercial properties that they're able to.
So if nobody has any questions about the last few slides, I'll make a few comments. The previous slide, when we look at the rate per thousand and we compare ourselves to other districts, what will keep that rate lower as lakefront property and commercial property. So if there are homes sitting around the perimeter of a lake, or there are expensive commercial properties like Walmart or Target, that's going to contribute to the tax base and drive the rate down. So I can tell you one of those districts, for example, is Casanova. So believe it or not, if you were to purchase a home in Casanova, the rate per thousand is going to be less, but it's also likely that your house is going to be assessed for more. So it doesn't always, work to a person's advantage. So we don't want to, mislead folks into thinking that we're, we've been incredibly frugal and for lack of a better term, cheap with our child's education. There are lots of variables that go into all the numbers that we're sharing with you tonight. And then on that next slide, when we talk about what it takes to generate an additional 1%, Mr. McCullough is asking, wow, what's the district at the top? I don't know if anybody can guess what district that might be. It's the tiniest district ever that I know of. I'm sure there are smaller districts in New York State, but that district is 2 square miles. It's Windport. So Windport's a very, very tiny district. It's I believe it's a K-8 program. So they're, they share the responsibility for education of the children with currently with East Syracuse Monroe. It was Salve at one time, it's now East Syracuse Monroe. So lots of things come into play here. Could I tell you as your business official, this district does a good job of its finances? I would say yes. I've always admired it from afar, starting at Onondaga Central and then Phoenix, and then years 20 years in my career came to Marcellus to see how things work there. It's a well-run district. All the districts on this list are well-run, in their own way. So, but anyways, it's a little bit of a little more depth with these numbers.
So, I'm going to turn it over to Tony for more detail.
So the New York State requires that we present our budget in a particular format. And so that's what we're seeing here. The expense side of our budget, we break down into 3 components: administrative, program, and capital. And so you can see that the administrative portion of our budget is about 7% of the entire budget. My counterparts and I survey each other for information. I can tell you that we're, slightly below average compared to, I think, the 25 other districts in the central New York area. So administratively, fairly efficient in comparison to other districts. That number is, interestingly, I happen to be at Onondaga Central when we started this requirement 20 some odd years ago. And most districts were falling in the 10, 11, 12% area. So now, as I just shared, districts in this region are around 8% or so. So that the percentage of budget is dropping over time. I don't think it's purposeful. It's just naturally how things take shape. That we tend to allocate more dollars towards the program because that's what we're here for. The program portion of our budget, about 74% of the overall budget. And the capital portion is about 18.7%. Just want to point out so the percentage increase of each, you'll see for administrative is fairly low. That's about, if I remember, 0.7, 0.7% increase. Whereas program is about 2.5%. Then capital is about 10%. So, you might wonder, geez, Tony, what's going on with the capital portion of our budget? So you're going to see in a little bit, I don't think we've mentioned yet, that next year we have some new debt coming on to the books that actually we did mention about $606,000. That $606,000 of additional debt is being used to pay for the roof replacement on all three of our buildings, auditorium and gymnasium window replacement at EMS, renovation of the original locker room at EMS in the basement, and then all the parking lot renovations that I'm sure you've noticed as you've driven through campus. So the balance of that increase in capital is related to within that capital component that I should have mentioned to you earlier, is our facilities operations, including utilities, electricity, natural gas. We're seeing some pretty substantial increases in electricity costs starting next year. And then there are some employee benefits that are also allocated to capital. But I would say that's a one-time deal, right? So we see that bump next year, and then every year after that, it should level off. That's kind of the goal of our program for our capital budget. But we do want to see a substantial increase in programming.
Can you just give a little breakdown of what each of those three expenditures were? What is built into each one of them?
Sure. Yeah, I should have started with that. So administrative would be the district office, the building level administration, insurances, and I'm going to refer to my little brochure here to try to capture everything that I should capture. Board of Education expenses, finance and legal services. So we do utilize the services of an attorney, personnel, oversight. There are some public information services that we subscribe to. And my favorite term, so some of the terminology in this document is state prescribed. So one of them is called special items. So I as I look at this every year, and I remember, man, I really got to change that. That's insurance. That's our liability, casualty and property insurance. And then employee benefits for all of those items. Within program is our instructional program, transportation of students, athletics, special education services, guidance counselors, psychologists. So all of the things that you might imagine, we all enjoy about our school district. And then lastly, capital. The capitals where all of the loan payments are for facilities improvements, our maintenance department, our custodial department, and I think I mentioned earlier, utilities. So our electricity, natural gas, water, sewer, all of them. Yeah, thank you. So our estimated revenues, so looking at state aid, we did realize an increase in state aid, as you can see here, estimated of about a little over $500,000. I would love to stand up here and tell you that New York State has given Marcellus more money to use for programs, but that's not the case for us, unfortunately. But that increase is due to, as I mentioned, the additional debt service for our capital improvement projects. On the revenue side of our budget, we get building aid from New York State for those expenses. So of that increase that you see here, a good chunk of that is related to additional building aid. There are some other ancillary dollars for expenditure-driven aids like transportation and BOCES. So I'll just mention briefly that Marcellus, one of the common questions that we had in previous hearings is that I understand enrollment's dropping in Marcellus, so why aren't the expenses dropping as well? And the reality is, if we had lots more time, we could take a look at what's happened with staffing over, say, the last 20 years. And I say 20 years because 20 years ago, Marcellus had about 2,200 kids. We're down to just under, we're at about 1,350 this year. So we've experienced a significant drop in enrollment. And so looking at staffing counts, yeah, we've reduced staff without question. I want to say that an elementary grade level would have had 8 sections. We're now down to between 4 and 6, depending on how many kids are in each grade level. So the unfortunate consequence of declining enrollment and the way that state aid is delivered to school districts is that if you drop too much, you now fall into this category called health harms, which means, for Marcellus, we know that your enrollment's dropped, so we're not going to whack you with a decline in state aid. We're going to keep you flat. And so that's essentially where we've been. We've had some additional, it's called foundation aid, but not much. So if we were to compare Marcellus to Salve over, I forget the number of years, let's say it was the last 5 years. Our total increase in foundation aid has been about $800,000. Salve's has been about $9 million, right? Very similar size district, slightly different demographic, relatively the same number of students, but their enrollment has not dropped as quickly as Marcellus. Their enrollment's dropped, but not as quickly as Marcellus. So they have been a benefactor of, pretty generous aid packages. We, on the other hand, not so generous, but it is what it is, and we deal with it and we plan accordingly. So as Jeannie mentioned earlier, we are reducing primarily through attrition, our staffing. A year ago, we and the board committed to a reduction of a minimum of 10 FTEs over the next 3 years. And that's really what we need to do to stay fiscally solid. And then that's all because of our circumstance with state aid. So I'll move on to real property taxes. We talked earlier about the tax levy limit calculation. And I'm going to break that down for you as in a relatively simplistic way, just because the formula is gets a little crazy. But she mentioned CPI or 2%, whichever is less. So that's about 2% of the 3. It's actually 1.9% of the 3.6 is due to that alone. Marcellus, as we know, we have some new homes being constructed in Marcellus. We're happy about that. And there's a component of the tax cap that accommodates for that. So I'll exaggerate the example. If a district were to double the number of homes in the school district, then theoretically, it's going to need to double the education services. And theoretically, may have to double its tax levy. So Marcellus, in our case, we have seen an increase of about 0.8% in property. However they calculate this, I don't know, that's done in Albany, but that's a number that's given to us that we have to enter into our formula. So that's another 0.8%. So we have 1.9 plus 0.8 is 2.7. We have another 0.9% that's attributable to that those additional loan payments for this building project that I mentioned. So, and that additional 0.9% would be the difference between the additional loan payments and the building aid that comes to us from New York State. So lots of detail here, but we do want to convey it to you. So hopefully I'm making sense. And the last portion is other sources. We've been very fortunate, and for those of you who are able to save money, you probably are realizing some additional interest income. So are we. So our interest rate used to be like 0.1% at the lowest. We're now getting around a little over 5%. So that's generating, rather than about $40,000 a year in interest, believe it or not, to this year, we should realize interest earnings of about 1.2 million. So, massive additional dollars, but we also borrow money, don't forget. So just like you all do when you buy homes. So our debt is also more expensive. So this is a slide we provide each year. It sort of gives me, butterflies, not in a great way, but we share this information because people want What's the impact on my taxes? So we've always used this example of $100,000 home. Good luck finding one of those anymore. So let's do some quick math. Let's make it a $200,000 home. It's just coincidence. The two numbers on the right, $64 and $45. If we add those two together, that's $109. That's about the increase a person might expect if they own a $200,000 home. If you own a $400,000 home, you can about double that. So here's why I don't like sharing this information, because it's never right. It's usually lower because of new property, right? So this does not take into consideration new property. This does not take into consideration increases in assessment. So it's almost always lower. And the only way that I can demonstrate that for you is at the top. So last year, we shared an estimate of $20.71 for the tax on true. So that's your the true value of your property divided by 1,000 times that number, you might estimate your taxes. Well, that number, the actual, is $2.84 less than what we projected. That's because of this crazy housing market and the property values skyrocketing. That's the consequence. So we've shared the information, but don't hold me to it. In all likelihood, it'll be less than what we've projected here. And none of this will be finalized until August, when we receive our assessed values from the 6 towns that make up Marcellus. We also provide this estimated tax rate. Again, this $18.51, likely to be lower than that. We just include the caveat at the bottom. Estimated values will change. They will, without a doubt. They'll likely be less. It's to try to talk about this specific to a person's house, like Mrs. Swenson's house. It's because we don't know what's going to happen between now and the time taxes are set. We do have to provide information about a contingency budget. So there are what we label non-contingent items throughout our entire budget that don't amount to much. They amount to about just shy of $109,000 worth of things that we would absolutely have to remove from our budget if the voters were to not approve our budget. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we I'll just describe real quick that so there's some non-contingent equipment, meaning we don't really need that equipment to operate our school district next year. So we would back that out. And then there are some employees that are not part of the collective bargaining group. We're not contractually obligated to give them a wage increase. And so those increases total $44,139. So again, if we were to not pass our budget, we would have to automatically pull those out. There are some other limitations with the increase in the administrative portion of our budget, which is relatively minor. I think on the previous slides, that was about $30,000. So the bigger chunk would be property taxes, that under a contingent budget, we are not permitted to increase our tax levy. And so if voters were to not approve our budget, and without the use of allocating additional reserves, we'd have to further reduce our budget by $664,000. This is a snapshot of reserves. Earlier, I mentioned about $9 million, and that's the number on the lower right. And I also mentioned prior to COVID, we were at about $6 million. So you'll see that under the 2019-20 column. It's actually, there's a 1-year lag on these numbers. So if you can take my word for it, that pre-COVID, we were at about $6 million. And today we're currently at $9 million. A portion of that, you'll see the capital reserve line. So we've already, the voters had approved previously funding and use of $1.7 million. We're now looking at an additional funding and use of about $2.5 million. So that's the number I mentioned earlier, that the board will see a resolution to fund our capital reserve. That's what I'm projecting that funding will be. All the other reserves have been very stable. you'll see the appropriated fund balance number that we mentioned earlier at the bottom, just about the south of 1.9 million. Jean had mentioned earlier the purchase of buses, so this is something that you'll likely see every year. Roughly two buses every year. And then periodically, we have a need to replace a 30-passenger bus and with a wheelchair lift. And then we're also looking for not an additional minivan, this minivan would replace an aging minivan that would be transferred over to our maintenance department for their use. You mentioned a 10-year schedule, and then two the larger 66-passenger buses would be disposed of. And then, of course, thank you, Sophia, for being here. This is Sophia Brandt in the corner. She's from the Marcellus Free Library. As being mentioned, we have a proposition to increase the library levy by $15,845. This is the relevant information about the vote itself. This Tuesday, May 21st, from noon to 9 p.m. And last but not least, this year we'll be electing 2 new board members to our Board of Education. I'll mention that Michael McAuliffe and Kelly Rossiter, who have been with us for a long time. I'm not thinking 9 and 6. Mr. McAuliffe has been with us for 42 years.
9.
So six for you, I think?
Six.
Yeah, 6 and 9, yep. So thank you very much for everything you've done for us. And so we have 4 candidates looking to fill those 2 seats: Justin Pritchard, Catherine Cook, Amy Bartolotta, and Elizabeth Swenson. To be a qualified voter, citizen of the United States, at least 18 years of age, reside in the district for at least 30 days. And we generally do not ask for folks' driver's license at the time they vote, but I guess they have the right to if they would like to ask. And that is it. Thank you so much for indulging us. I know that was a lot of information, so we're to the point of any questions.
I do have one question, Mike. You shared with us a lot of information, making comparisons, town and township to town and township. In the brochure that you handed out, you indicated that, and it says, where do Marcellus Central District's revenues come from? And you say 53.4% come from property taxes, 39.2% from school aid and other, and then there are 7.4. How does that 53.4 number compare with other towns and townships?
I have the numbers, but I had not calculated it, so I'm going to take a guess. So let's talk. As I mentioned, Salve earlier. So it's likely that Salve, the portion of their budget funded through property taxes is probably in the 30% range. And the reason for that is that they're less wealthy than Marcellus is, and so the state contributes more to their budget. Whereas a district like, let's say, Skaneateles, I would say their property taxes are probably paying for 65 to 70% of the budget. So somewhere in that vicinity in Central New York. I love this data, and if I knew you were going to ask that question, I would have been ready. Really preparing it, because it really is fascinating statewide. If you were to go downstate in Westchester County, you know, maybe 10% of their budget funded through state aid, 90% through. That's really interesting information. So yeah, if you're desperate to know, give me a call. I will.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Will we have an opportunity to speak to the candidates?
Yes, in fact, following this is a
Great.
Meet the Candidates Forum. So
Super.
absolutely.
No, there are no questions. I think we can technically adjourn the meeting until the polls open at noon on May 21st. Next Tuesday. Thank you, everyone.
We do have our contact information up there in case you think of a question later on and you want to reach out to either Tony or myself and our number too. So
Thank you.
if you're like me, I do think of things at 1 in the morning, like. "What time was that?"
Yeah, my best wishes.
All right, thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate it.
I'm sorry, can we ask Academy a question?
At 7 o'clock, we're gonna start a meet the candidates
Oh.
forum.
6 minutes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the restroom break. If anybody's interested, run now.
I mean, I can walk you off of there, but-
I
know what I'm. You're in the recesses.
They always say, "Oh, you never get all the time."
Yeah. Just so that has. So.
I don't know.
Yeah.